Hello and welcome to The Last Word. The revelation that two of the country's best-known journalists could have acted as go-betweens or lobbyists has shaken the country. Although with a few exceptions the media has ignored the subject, it set the websites aflame. So today we ask, what do these revelations show? How should we judge the two journalists? And beyond that, the journalistic fraternity itself. I invited Vir Sanghvi and Barkha Dutt to join this discussion, but both declined. However, I have the editor of The Hindu, N. Ram, the editor of the Business Standard, Sanjaya Baru, the editor of Open magazine, which first published the transcripts, Manu Joseph, and the founding partner of Perfect Relations and former business journalist, Dilip Cherian. Manu Joseph, given that these were private conversations, and second, that there is a Supreme Court advisory against making such conversations public, why did you publish the transcripts?
Considering the extraordinary nature of this story, we knew that we were right in publishing this story. And also we had information that very soon these transcripts are going to enter public domain in the form of YouTube or WikiLeaks or other websites. So we took an editorial call on that.
Secondly, should you have given the people concerned a right of response at the same time as publishing their conversations?
Yes, it's a complicated issue. We had discussed that internally because the people who are involved, Barkha Dutt and Vir Sanghvi, very senior journalists, and we have a lot of professional respect for them. But there are other people involved in the transcripts. Some of them may not fully understand what journalistic process is or what journalistic ethics are. So I was very sure that if the word of the story got out, there would be enormous pressure on us to kill the story.
In other words, if you had given or offered a right of response, you might have had an injunction taken out stopping the story.
That too, yes.
Gentlemen, let's first focus on Vir Sanghvi and Barkha Dutt. Sanjaya Baru, does the content of their conversations suggest a higher or greater public purpose which justifies breaching their privacy?
Well, any breaching of privacy is part of journalism. We are all the time trying to find out what people are up to. But I think the question you asked is a valid one, which is that we never publish anything without those who are being referred to are made aware of what is being published, and their viewpoint should be reflected. So I think legitimately the view of those people who have been mentioned should have been carried. Certainly there are many people whose views have, whose conversations have been printed in these magazines who have not said anything particularly damaging, and I think their reputations may have been affected as a result of getting clubbed.
Let's come to the others later. Let's for now stick to Vir Sanghvi and Barkha Dutt. Are you therefore disputing the point that Manu Joseph made, that if he had given Vir and Barkha a right of response, they might have moved an injunction and stopped the publication altogether? Are you disputing that?
Yes, I think I would insist as an editor that whatever we publish, the people who we refer to should not find it a surprise in the morning. They should know that we are publishing, and we have every right to publish.
Alright. Enram, let's focus a little in depth on those conversations that Vir and Barkha had. It's quite clear that they had agreed to carry messages from Nira Radia to the Congress party. Now, as you view it, were they simply acting as couriers and go-betweens, or would you say that they were behaving like lobbyists? Which would it be?
I think they are out of line in those conversations, and I'm glad that because the media also need to be put under the searchlight. So I fully agree with Manu Joseph and also Vinod Mehta that it had to be published. But yes, I think it's out of line, because here was about portfolio allocation and about a gas price dispute. And in both cases, regardless of what they did, I think it is embarrassing. It was wrong. It is not professional on the part of those journalists to have done that. And hats off for those who bring it into the public realm.
So would you also
That's my response.
Would you also agree with Manu Joseph that if he had given these two a right of response, there was the risk that they would have moved an injunction and stopped publication, and that in a sense justifies his going ahead without forewarning them?
There will be no injunction. There is no prior restraint. Courts rarely give it in India, unlike the UK. You know that, Karan. But yes, I don't think if you're doing an expose, there is time, and it doesn't happen at all. We did that at Bofors. We didn't have to consult with each other before publishing it and so on. So I think it's typical of journalism, that you go ahead. In Watergate, they didn't give Nixon a chance to respond, or did they? This is, of course, much smaller because these journalists, as my friend put it, were playing the role of little leaguers.
Okay.
But I think it has affected their reputation.
I
don't want to judge them too harshly. They have a right to reply.
Let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. I'll come back to the impact it's had on their reputation in a moment's time, but it's a very telling point you make when you compare Manu Joseph's behavior with the behavior of the media over Bofors or the American press over Watergate. Dilip Cherian, the first key question is, do you believe that they actually acted as couriers and go-betweens, or did they simply string Nira Radia along as a way of advancing a conversation and getting information? They claim that they were stringing her along. Do you believe that's true, or do you think they actually did what they committed themselves to do, which is carry messages?
I like Enram's comment of being out of line, but there's also a question of taking a line, hook, line and sinker. If there is proof of that, then in the case of written evidence or a television program which goes along the lines of anything that Radia is suggesting, then I would say that it is much more than going out of being out of line, and that there is a breach of journalistic ethics. As far as I can see, the evidence needs to be clear that there is a line that's taken and one that is actually then regurgitated in exact format. The second point that needs to be also taken into account is there an exchange of money or largesse of some kind?
Let me stop you there. I'll come to that issue in a moment's time. I want to take each of these issues one by one rather than collapse them together. So come back to the defense that Vir and Barkha have both made. They both claim that they were only stringing Nira Radia along. They were only appearing to agree to carry messages. In fact, they didn't. Do you believe that?
Having been a journalist for a good part of my life and having been on the other side and working on the media, I know that very often they try and extract information out of you and string you along for a certain period of time. As long as it's that, and as long as some of the expressions in the tapes are expressions which are delusions of grandeur, that's fine.
Okay.
As I said, if there is evidence of taking the line, then you're out of line as a journalist.
The second critical question, Manu Joseph, is whether you deem them to have behaved as couriers and go-betweens, or whether you say they were lobbyists. Is the carrying of messages, asking the Congress to make an individual a minister, or asking for a particular portfolio for that individual, an appropriate message for a journalist to convey?
Yeah, but the issue is more serious than that. To answer your question, no,
it's not appropriate.
It was highly inappropriate what they were doing, but the issue is much more serious than that. Now, we have a situation where Barkha Dutt is talking to a very powerful corporate PR person who's representing two giants, two companies that are interested in the telecom business, and she is very keen on one person becoming the telecom minister. Now, Barkha Dutt is talking to a person and she's aware of the situation. And in my opinion, that is probably the biggest story of the decade. She didn't report that story. So that, I think, is very serious.
Let me put that to you, Sanjaya Baru. You've just heard Manu Joseph explain that in the course of her conversations, and this applies to Vir just as much as it applies to Barkha, both of them found out that the DMK was using a professional lobbyist who was at the same time also working for Mukesh Ambani and Ratan Tata to lobby or influence the Congress party. In itself, that revelation should have been a story, Manu Joseph says, for Vir and Barkha to report. They didn't report it. Do you think that they should have reported it rather than hide that fact and try and get involved in conveying messages instead?
Absolutely. I think that is where I would entirely agree with Manu Joseph. This is, this is a developing political story. In those 24 hours, cabinet formation and the entire battle for portfolios, for a political journalist, this is front page story. And there I entirely agree that it's not the job of journalists to be deciding who should get what portfolio, and this is not on.
Alright, Enram, let's come to some of the specifics about Vir first and then Barkha later, which have been revealed in these conversations. Vir seems to have offered to do a scripted interview of Mukesh Ambani. At another point, he repeatedly asks Radia what he should put into his Hindustan Times column counterpoint. An article in your paper on Wednesday shows that at least on one occasion, his column reflected what he was asked to write. What do you make of all of that?
Yes, he has of course said it, those were his views, but it is very embarrassing, and I think there's a real case there of what you shouldn't be doing. I have no idea whether that swung the decision, his column and so on, but the fact that it appeared next day, it requires more serious explanation than he has given.
In other words, his explanation that this was just a coincidence of views is inadequate and insufficient. Is that what you're saying, Ram?
Absolutely. To put it mildly, Karan.
Dilip Cherian, let's now come to some of the specifics about Barkha Dutt. I want to quote to you one of the things she says on the tape. What should I tell them, she asks. Tell me, what should I tell them? And then at a later point she says, I'll talk to Azad. I'll talk to Azad right after I get out of RCR. Many people have interpreted that to mean that she was A, asking for instructions, and then B, willing to convey the message she was given. Is that how you interpret it?
Not at all. In fact, this is the one area where I know, and having investigated a little bit and having a little bit more information, I know that she actually did not speak to Azad at all on this. That's one.
So she misled Nira when she said she would?
She led Nira Radia on, which is appropriate journalistic behavior in my case. As I see it, she wanted to get more information out of Nira about who else she was wanting to get to try and influence the decision, which, as both Manu and Sanjay are saying, is a story she could have reported.
Okay, so when
but
you
I think she's done well in stringing Nira on to get more information on what's happening.
So just to clarify, when you say she led Nira on, you're actually accepting that she deliberately misled Nira into believing that she would talk to Azad but didn't.
Which is what you do with a source, because you have to play the source along to make sure that you get extract the maximum mileage out of that source.
Except that in this instance, some people may think that she was lying. Is lying also an acceptable way of stringing a source along?
You know, I think that she could well have wanted to at least make an effort to try, but the fact is, did it happen? No, it did not happen.
All right. Manu Joseph, finally, in agreeing to act as go-betweens or lobbyists, one thing does emerge or seem clear, that both Vir and Barkha were using the access and influence which their professions give them or which their employers give them for purposes for which that influence wasn't originally intended. As you view it, is that acceptable or is that a misuse?
Well, that's a gross misuse of journalistic access. But see, there's a large issue here. Now, how do we know, just coming back to the point that you were trying to make, how do we know whether those calls were made or were not made? Can you just elaborate on that? I mean, I'm not clear how you can be
basically so what he's asking is, how do you know she didn't ring Azad? How can you be certain that she didn't ring Azad?
Well, the information that I have is that she didn't actually manage to get through to Azad.
Forgive me. And so she tried.
No.
If you say she didn't manage to get through, that suggests she tried.
She could well have tried. As I said, I'm not defending.
So then hang on a second. Then that also suggests that she intended to fulfill it. She intended to be a go-between, but failed because she couldn't get through.
Or she didn't try too hard because it was beyond her call of duty.
Not trying too hard is a bit of detail. If you try once, it's trying. You're saying that she tried but failed to get through.
You know, I think that as far as Barkha is concerned in this, if one.
No, but answer my question. Did Barkha tell you this, that she tried and didn't get through?
No.
Then how do you know?
No. I checked myself to figure out whether in the Congress party.
Who did you check with? Did you ask Azad?
No, I have checked whether a call actually happened and whether.
But how can you check? Did you have access to the telephone records? Forgive me, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm just trying to clarify.
No, Karan, in every business, especially in the journalism business which I have been, you tend to know how to check these things out without necessarily having to reveal who you spoke to.
Alright, for the purposes of this discussion, I'll take your word for it, but I think I will note that you have raised a question of doubt that remains lingering in the air.